Why the Smartest Minds Choose Solitude, Carl Jung's Hidden Truth. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone. Arthur Schopenhauer. Welcome to Spiritual Wisdom, where we go beyond the noise to uncover the truths hidden in silence. Have you ever wondered why the most brilliant minds often seek solitude not out of isolation, but revelation? In today's video, we explore Carl Jung's hidden truth about why solitude is not loneliness, but the sacred ground where intelligence, creativity, and deep spiritual awakening are born. If you've ever felt the pull to step back from the world and tune into your own inner voice, this message is for you. Comment below. Solitude empowers me. If you believe silence is a form of strength, let's dive into the wisdom of the quiet minds who see what others don't. 1. Solitude is different from loneliness. It's freedom. Solitude is not loneliness. It is clarity. It is sovereignty. It is spiritual freedom. The most intelligent minds do not choose solitude out of bitterness or social failure, but out of deep discernment. They understand that constant social performance dulls authenticity, and that the craving for external validation slowly replaces inner truth. In solitude, they rediscover the self not filtered through roles or expectations. It is where the illusions of groupthink dissolve, where the masks we wear to belong are finally removed, and where the soul breathes without interruption. The spiritually awakened do not isolate because they cannot relate. They step back because they've realized how much of modern interaction is rooted in performance rather than presence. They are not avoiding people. They are seeking the truth. Solitude becomes a sanctuary where they can hear their own voice, unclouded by the projections and demands of others. Carl Jung once noted that the individual must detach from the collective in order to individuate. This detachment is not rejection. It is the sacred act of remembering who you are before the world told you who to be. Schopenhauer captured this perfectly when he wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." In that stillness, the self is no longer negotiated, it is reclaimed. This path is not easy, especially in a world addicted to noise, connection, and comparison. But those who walk it discover something rare: alignment. When you stop outsourcing your worth to reactions, likes, and approval, you begin to feel something deeper than pleasure. You begin to feel peace. Solitude sharpens perception. It strengthens your ability to think clearly, to create freely, and to love without attachment. The absence of others becomes a mirror that reflects back your truth. It is in solitude that you start to notice the patterns of your mind, the stories you've inherited, and the beliefs that no longer serve you. And in noticing, you begin to release. That release is spiritual awakening. To choose solitude in a culture of constant stimulation is an act of rebellion, but also an act of profound self-respect. It is saying, "I will no longer betray my inner rhythm to match the pace of a world out of sync with its own soul." It is here, in this deliberate separation, that the true mind blossoms. Creativity becomes sharper. Awareness becomes deeper. Spiritual wisdom no longer comes from books or gurus. It flows from within, from the space that only solitude can create. This is why the greatest thinkers, mystics, and visionaries have always sought time alone, not to escape life, but to see it more clearly. So while the world may misunderstand your retreat, the soul understands. And when you return from that sacred silence, you do not return empty. You return with vision, with power, with the kind of clarity that cannot be bought, borrowed, or given. It must be found. And it is always found in the stillness. 2. Solitude enables independent, creative thinking. Most people walk through life carrying thoughts that aren't truly their own. They adopt beliefs from parents, echo opinions from the news, and shape their personalities around what society finds acceptable. Even their dreams are filtered through expectations they never agreed to. This subtle form of mental inheritance is rarely questioned, because questioning requires stillness, and stillness is something most people avoid. When you're constantly in a group, even when it feels casual or comfortable, your mind becomes split. Part of it is watching what others think of you, adjusting your tone, anticipating reactions, or unconsciously mirroring behaviors to maintain social harmony. This isn't weakness. It's simply how the human brain evolved to survive in tribes. But what was once necessary for survival can become an obstacle to spiritual development. Because the truth is, your deepest insights, your most original thoughts, and your most powerful ideas only rise to the surface when you're alone, truly alone, with no one to impress, no opinions to manage, and no audience to perform for. Carl Jung knew this well. He said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Solitude creates the sacred condition in which that awakening becomes possible. It's in solitude that you begin to notice the subtle pull of your soul, the quiet discomforts you've been avoiding, and the intuitive sparks that are often drowned out by daily noise. Without the noise of others, you finally hear the soft inner voice that's been whispering truths your whole life. That voice is the root of spirituality. It doesn't speak in slogans or trends. It speaks in clarity, in presence, in truth. And once you've heard it, it becomes impossible to go back to a life of imitation. Solitude doesn't strip you of connection. It reveals the quality of connection you've been tolerating. It challenges the ego's need to be validated and replaces it with a desire to be authentic. It teaches you to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. It teaches you to think independently, not reactively. And most of all, it teaches you that spirituality isn't about escaping the world. It's about re-entering it with your soul intact. Many fear solitude because they equate it with loneliness. But loneliness is the absence of others. Solitude is the presence of yourself. It's the space where your spiritual intelligence sharpens, where your mind ceases to echo and begins to originate. This is why the most intelligent people throughout history have retreated from the crowd, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence for their own becoming. They understood that brilliance doesn't bloom in chaos. It blooms in stillness. In that stillness, creativity is not pressured. It flows. Ideas are not edited for acceptance. They arise in their purest form. And truth is not debated. It is known. Choosing solitude is not an act of rejection. It is an act of remembering. Remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Remembering that your thoughts have value before they are approved. Remembering that the most powerful forms of spiritual development begin when you dare to sit with your soul and let the silence speak. 3. Inner richness makes solitude fulfilling. Those who possess true intelligence and spiritual wisdom do not seek solitude to escape life. They embrace it to deepen it. For them, being alone is not a punishment, it is a privilege. Carl Jung understood this deeply when he said that loneliness doesn't stem from the absence of people, but from the inability to share what matters most. The most awakened minds have discovered that the richest conversations often happen in silence. The deepest answers arise not from external noise, but from still, internal waters. They have nurtured their inner world through books, ideas, journaling, and soul-searching to the point where solitude becomes more fulfilling than shallow interaction. It is within these quiet spaces that they connect with their truth, with their intuition, and with the creative force that moves the universe. This kind of solitude is not emptiness, it is fullness. It's not avoidance, it's alignment. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that no place offers more peace than a person's own soul. And for the spiritually intelligent, this inner refuge becomes their temple, their workshop, their sacred ground for transformation. They do not fear boredom because their minds are alive with meaning. They do not chase stimulation because they are already in deep conversation with their own purpose. In this inner world, they refine their thoughts, heal their wounds, and sharpen their discernment. They listen for truth instead of noise, and they find power not in attention, but in intention. As the world grows louder, these individuals grow quieter. They pull back, not because they are weak, but because they are strong enough to walk alone. They understand that energy is currency, and where it flows, life follows. So they protect their solitude the way an artist protects a blank canvas, knowing that from this space, something profound will emerge. They see solitude not as a gap to be filled, but as a portal to clarity. Through spiritual awakening, they begin to see life not as a performance, but as a reflection. They no longer need constant validation because they've already looked themselves in the eye and found peace. In solitude, they do the real work, confronting shadows, rewriting patterns, forgiving, creating, becoming. This is where their intelligence is sharpened, not through status or approval, but through courageous self-honesty. The solitude of a spiritually awakened mind is not silence, it's symphony. It is here that their intuition strengthens, their vision clarifies, and their purpose stabilizes. While the world idolizes connection, they revere coherence. They align, they evolve, and they rise not with noise, but with quiet power. 4. Intellectual independence requires isolation. In the quiet margins of life, far from the noise of external validation, the smartest minds have always discovered a sacred truth. Solitude is not loneliness, it is liberation. Newton unlocked gravity under an apple tree, not in a conference hall. Einstein envisioned relativity through inner reflection, not external applause. Darwin observed the evolution of life while immersed in personal inquiry, not surrounded by crowds. These breakthroughs weren't born from noise, but from the silence of independence. Intellectual freedom requires isolation because the most profound ideas often begin as whispers that would be drowned out by the collective voice of conformity. To dare to think differently, one must first dare to be alone. It is in solitude that the soul stretches beyond the limits of social expectation and touches a deeper realm of spiritual awakening. There, the mind becomes fearless, willing to explore strange, unpopular, even ridiculed ideas without needing immediate confirmation. This courage is not just intellectual, it is spiritual. It's the kind of courage that Carl Jung described when he said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. That awakening cannot happen in the crowd. It requires silence. It requires presence. It requires a willingness to face the uncertainty of your own becoming. Spirituality is not found in the performance of beliefs for others. It is discovered in the solitude of inner confrontation, in the stillness where no applause echoes. Solitude becomes the temple in which your intellect and spirit commune. In that sacred space, the ego loses its grip and the deeper self rises. You begin to question inherited truths and societal expectations. You start to reframe what success, love, and purpose truly mean to you, not as concepts taught by others, but as truths unearthed from your own depths. The solitary mind becomes a spiritual forge, where the soul is purified through self-reflection and intellectual daring. You realize that validation is fleeting, but inner clarity is eternal. You stop asking for permission to think differently, to live differently, to feel deeply. You begin to trust your intuition as your compass and your discernment as your anchor. Spiritual awakening is not a dramatic moment of enlightenment. It is the accumulation of quiet realizations born from deep internal inquiry. It is the soft unfolding of a mind no longer dependent on praise, but rooted in purpose. And that purpose doesn't shout. It whispers. It leads. It challenges. Solitude teaches you to sit with your thoughts long enough for truth to surface. It shows you that being alone doesn't make you broken. It makes you brave. In solitude, the soul sheds its layers of social identity and embraces the unfiltered truth of its own essence. You stop fearing the silence and begin honoring it. You realize that only by stepping away from the crowd can you ever truly offer something of value to it. The greatest service to humanity often begins with a season of sacred withdrawal. The spiritual journey is not always visible, but its depth is undeniable. In the end, the smartest minds choose solitude not because they reject the world, but because they are preparing to return to it with something rare: original thought, awakened clarity, and a quiet strength that no external noise can shake. 5. Socializing is mentally costly. Every social interaction, no matter how trivial, comes with an invisible price tag. Intelligent people begin to notice this cost early in life, the silent drain on their mental energy as they navigate expectations, read between lines, suppress authentic responses, and perform roles that society demands. It's not that they're antisocial. It's that their minds are wired to crave depth, not noise. The mind that constantly thinks, analyzes, and reflects becomes acutely aware that conversations about weather, gossip, or appearances offer no nourishment for the soul. Spirituality and spiritual development require mental, emotional, and energetic space to bloom. This space is compromised every time one has to filter their thoughts, monitor their tone, or pretend to care about things that hold no real meaning. That's why those who walk the path of deep understanding, who feel the weight of the unseen, who question what most people accept blindly, begin to retreat, not to run away, but to come home to themselves. They begin to preserve their attention like it's sacred, because it is. Attention is the gateway to consciousness, and consciousness is where truth lives. Carl Jung believed that solitude was not isolation, but connection to deeper layers of the psyche, to hidden truths buried under the noise of society. When you are constantly on for others, you are rarely ever present for yourself. Intelligent minds feel this dissonance sharply. They minimize casual socializing not out of arrogance, but as an act of devotion to their inner clarity. They understand that the mind is a garden, and every interaction plants seeds some of wisdom, but many of weeds. To protect their mental soil, they become selective. They start to withdraw from energy that feels scattered, conversations that go in circles, and people who speak much but say little. Solitude becomes the fertile ground where they can think their own thoughts, feel their own feelings, and reestablish the integrity of their inner world. And from that stillness, true creativity is born, not the kind that seeks validation, but the kind that shakes the soul and expands awareness. In silence, their intuition sharpens, their ideas crystallize, and their energy begins to regenerate. Socializing is mentally expensive because it often asks us to fragment ourselves. We present one version to colleagues, another to friends, yet another to family. Rarely are we invited to be whole. And so, the intelligent, the spiritually awakened, begin to protect their wholeness like a secret flame. They stop explaining their silence, stop apologizing for their space, and start treating solitude as a sacred act. In that space, they write, build, reflect, and most importantly, heal. The noise of the world can't teach you what the quiet of your own soul will. Spirituality doesn't ask you to be everywhere, it asks you to be here, deeply and truthfully. It is in solitude that one confronts the truth of who they are, what they believe, what they carry, and what they're becoming. There is no audience to perform for, no expectation to meet only the steady, silent mirror of your own awareness. And once you experience the richness of that stillness, chaos begins to look like theft. You realize how expensive it is to abandon yourself just to maintain social ties that don't align with your growth. So you let go, not out of judgment, but out of reverence. You stop attending conversations that dilute your energy, stop answering messages that disrupt your focus, and start treating your mental space like a sanctuary. Because it is. To live wisely is to spend your mental energy intentionally. And solitude is not just a preference, it becomes a necessity. It becomes the quiet fortress where your mind can breathe, your soul can speak, and your life can realign with the truth of who you are becoming. 6. Solitude leads to philosophical insight. When you step away from the noise of daily life and allow yourself to be alone, not because you dislike others, but because you crave clarity, you begin to notice what most people never see. Solitude isn't isolation. It's intelligence in motion. It's a sacred space where the distractions fade and the deeper truths emerge. In that stillness, your mind begins to stretch beyond surface-level chatter and into the realm of patterns, motivations, and unconscious drives that shape humanity. What once seemed normal small talk, social games, emotional reactivity suddenly reveals itself as a web of unconscious behavior. The smartest minds throughout history have chosen solitude not to escape life, but to see it clearly. Carl Jung, a pioneer of spiritual wisdom, understood that introspection is not a luxury, but a necessity for transformation. In solitude, you're no longer reacting. You're observing, reflecting, and discerning. You begin to notice how people wear masks, speak from fear, seek validation, and avoid discomfort at all costs. But instead of judging, you understand, because intelligence isn't just about facts, it's about perception. As you deepen into solitude, your thoughts become sharper, your emotions more honest, and your insights more profound. You start to recognize how much noise governs the world's opinions expectations, obligations, and how quiet offers something far more valuable: truth. This truth doesn't shout, it whispers, and only those with the courage to be alone can hear it. You begin to untangle yourself from emotional dependency, from the need to explain yourself, from the pressure to be understood. You let go of the exhausting performance that society often demands and realize that presence, authentic, undiluted presence, is your power. Jung called this process individuation, the sacred return to the true self, a path only walked by those who refuse to abandon their inner world. You begin to see yourself and others through the lens of symbolic meaning. You understand archetypes, wounds, projections, and shadow. You become a witness, not just to others, but to yourself. That's why solitude can feel heavy. It mirrors everything you've been taught to suppress. But through that mirror, you awaken. The spiritual awakening born in solitude is not a single moment. It is a gradual unfolding, a deepening awareness that what's real cannot be found in noise, applause, or validation. Intelligence, in its truest form, is not how much you know, but how deeply you see. And to see deeply, you must be willing to be still. Still enough to hear your intuition. Still enough to face your fears. Still enough to sit with uncertainty until it reveals its purpose. In solitude, you realize that the world's opinions are fleeting, but your soul's truth is eternal. You stop looking for direction outside and begin to listen to the compass within. This shift is not easy, but it is sacred. It transforms loneliness into liberation, silence into insight, and discomfort into evolution. What once felt like isolation now becomes intimacy with your essence. You are not lost in solitude. You are found. You're not disconnected. You're becoming whole. This is why the smartest minds, the truly awakened ones, often choose solitude, not because they're superior, but because they've remembered something the world forgot: that the most important conversations you will ever have are the ones you have with your own soul. 7. Contribute rather than conform. Intelligent people do not turn their backs on society because they despise it. They do so because they see through it. Their temporary departure is not an escape, but a spiritual initiation. They withdraw not from weakness, but from clarity. When everyone else is caught in the whirlwind of social expectations, mindless trends, and surface-level communication, the spiritually awakened individual seeks depth. They recognize that in order to contribute something of real value to the collective, they must first remove themselves from the noise that dulls originality. Solitude becomes their sacred sanctuary, not because they fear the world, but because they are preparing to return to it with a higher vibration, with something that uplifts rather than conforms. In a world that celebrates conformity, the truly intelligent offer a mirror that reflects back authenticity. And this mirror is not easily forged. It is shaped in silence, in hours of reflection, in questioning what others take as truth. Spirituality isn't found in public applause. It's cultivated in private struggle. These individuals wrestle with their own shadows, confront uncomfortable truths, and dare to think what others won't. They are not rebelling against the world. They are listening to a frequency that most have forgotten how to hear. The solitude they choose is not loneliness, but alignment. It's a spiritual awakening where the soul sheds all that is performative and remembers its essence. Conformity rewards quick opinions, predictable behavior, and agreeable thought. But contribution, the kind that moves people, heals generations, or sparks revolutions requires solitude, courage, and a mind willing to wander into uncomfortable terrain. The intelligent mind understands that wisdom cannot be downloaded from collective chatter. It must be earned in the furnace of quiet introspection. Carl Jung understood this when he wrote, "Solitude is for me a fount of healing which makes my life worth living." This healing is not just personal. It becomes collective when the individual returns, bearing spiritual insight instead of recycled ideas. What society often labels as withdrawal is actually a rite of passage. These souls do not reject connection, they reject distortion. They are not avoiding people, they are avoiding false versions of themselves. In modern life, where productivity is worshipped and busyness is mistaken for purpose, the choice to be still is radical. But it is in this stillness that the inner voice grows louder than the world's opinions. And once that voice is clear, these individuals come back not to fit in, but to guide others out. They bring language for things others only feel. They embody a kind of quiet power that doesn't demand attention, but commands respect. Spiritual wisdom doesn't scream, it radiates. The ones who choose solitude are not vanishing. They are refining their essence. And when they re-enter the world, they do so with offerings shaped not by pressure to perform, but by the freedom to be real. Their message carries the weight of introspection. Their presence holds the energy of authenticity. They remind us that to truly contribute is not to echo the world, but to elevate it. This is the mark of the spiritually awakened, those who prioritize the inner journey not out of selfishness, but out of devotion to a higher contribution that only solitude can prepare them for. 8. They're scary smart because they are terrifyingly intelligent, because they have mastered the rarest of powers in today's overstimulated world, the ability to thrive without applause. While most people chase likes, validation, and belonging, these individuals have stepped into a higher realm of spiritual development, where their sense of self-worth is no longer dependent on outside approval. They do not perform for the crowd. Instead, they have reclaimed their energy and redirected it inward, where their thoughts are free from manipulation and their emotions no longer fluctuate with public opinion. Their sovereignty of mind makes them ungovernable by systems designed to condition and control. They are not rebellious for attention, but for liberation. And this quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't beg to be seen, unsettles society, because it defies everything the collective has been trained to believe about happiness, success, and identity. By choosing solitude over noise, they gain a sharper intellect, a richer inner world, and an emotional depth that cannot be replicated through social mimicry. Their peace is not fragile. It is earned through countless hours of self-reflection and detachment from shallow distractions. They are not running from the world. They have simply risen above its illusions. Their solitude is sacred, a space where they decode their own patterns, confront their shadows, and rebuild their psyche on truth rather than trends. Carl Jung's insight that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are comes alive in them not as a quote, but as a daily practice. And because they have no need to impress anyone, their creativity, decisions, and presence radiate authenticity. They've realized that the fewer people they need, the more power they have. This is not arrogance, it is alignment. They are no longer accessible to manipulation because they've made themselves emotionally self-sufficient. They don't chase, they attract. They don't conform, they embody. And in doing so, they expose how much of modern life is built on spiritual codependency. This is why their intelligence feels terrifying. It cannot be mapped, sold, or contained. They become invisible to systems that rely on obedience and predictable behavior. Their happiness doesn't come from comparison, but from coherence. Their mind becomes a sanctuary of clarity, no longer distorted by the noise of expectation. They dismantle social norms not by arguing against them, but by outgrowing them. And in a culture that equates noise with worth, their silence is revolutionary. So when you encounter someone like this calm, unbothered, whole in their solitude, understand that you are not witnessing detachment. You are witnessing spiritual evolution. They have chosen to build a life that doesn't need to be broadcast in order to be valid. They have chosen to walk the path of quiet mastery, where stillness is power and solitude is the training ground of the soul. And that, in today's world, is the highest form of intelligence. And so, in a world constantly shouting for attention, the smartest minds quietly choose solitude, not as an escape, but as a sacred return to their own inner truth. Carl Jung reminded us that loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on the quiet strength that solitude offers your soul. Let us know in the comments how you embrace solitude in your life. And if you found value in today's insights, don't forget to like this video. Share it with someone on their own spiritual journey. Subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next step in your awakening. Until next time, choose stillness, choose wisdom. Carl Jung warned us about this dangerous psychological sign. Beware of those who project their darkness onto others while wearing a smile. Carl Jung believed that the most dangerous individuals are not the loudest or the most visibly broken, but those who silently cast their inner shadows onto the world without even realizing it. In today's video, we'll uncover the subtle yet powerful psychological sign that Jung warned could reveal the hidden danger in seemingly harmless people. What if protecting your peace wasn't about avoiding loud negativity, but about recognizing quiet manipulation? Stay with us to discover how spiritual wisdom and psychological awareness can shield your soul. And before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever sensed something off about someone who appeared kind on the surface? Share your experience in the comments below, because your insight might just open someone else's eyes. Let's grow together. 1. The red flag. Shadow projection with absolute conviction. Carl Jung discovered something truly disturbing that most people would never suspect. The most destructive individuals are not those who scream the loudest or act the cruelest, but those who silently and unconsciously project their inner darkness onto others with absolute conviction. 73% of Jung's most dangerous patients shared this warning sign. And what made it so terrifying was not its presence, but its invisibility. These people often appeared polite, kind, articulate, even morally upright. They smiled, they sympathized, they spoke soothing words. But beneath the surface lurks a psychological and spiritual danger that is rarely recognized until it is too late. The warning sign is not rage, manipulation, or overt toxicity. It is projection, the projection of one's shadow self. In Jungian terms, the shadow is the unconscious part of the personality that contains everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. Our selfishness, our jealousy, our desire to control, the wounds we repress and never tolerate. When a person is spiritually asleep, unaware of their inner world, they do not recognize these parts within themselves. Instead, they see them in others. They truly believe that those around them are liars, manipulators, sowers of chaos. And the more they deny their shadow, the more certain they are of the guilt of others. This is where the real danger lies, not in the behavior itself, but in the psychic blindness that feeds it. A person who projects his shadow with absolute conviction cannot be reasoned with. You cannot show them the truth because they believe they already possess it. They do not rage because they are evil. They act because they believe they are defending a cause. And this belief, masked by spiritual ignorance, becomes a sharper weapon than any sword. Jung treated such a patient in 1913, whose charisma and eloquence hid a profound denial of responsibility for his inner wounds. He seemed harmless, even admirable, and yet he destroyed his life with the power of false accusations. What Jung realized then was profound. Shadow projection is not just a psychological process. It is a psychic warning system. It is a sign to retreat not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Spiritual awakening means seeing ourselves clearly, including the parts we do not want to face. It means accepting our jealousy, pride, judgment, and working with them instead of burying them. Because when we don't, they don't go away. They haunt our relationships and distort our reality. A person in the dark will accuse others of the very things they fear most. They will turn kindness into manipulation, honesty into betrayal, independence into abandonment. And they won't stop until they feel safe, which is impossible because their fear is inside them, not outside. That's why recognizing this warning sign is essential for anyone walking the path of spirituality and emotional clarity. The most dangerous attacks are those that are disguised, that are righteous, and that are carried out with calm certainty. But spiritual wisdom teaches us that clarity is not paranoia, it is protection. Not every smile is safe, and not every soft voice carries the truth. Sometimes love is a mask. Sometimes projection is a sermon. And sometimes the deepest test of the soul is walking away from someone who believes they are the light but refuses to face their darkness. 2. They believe the lie and make others believe it too. They believe the lie, and what makes it terrifying is that they don't just tell it, they become it. The danger lies in the fact that the person projecting their shadow is often completely unaware that they're distorting reality. In their mind, they're not lying or manipulating. They're speaking the truth as they see it. But this truth is shaped by unresolved wounds, buried fears, and repressed emotions. Carl Jung taught that shadow projection is not merely a psychological quirk. It is a deeply spiritual crisis, one that reveals how far someone has drifted from authentic self-awareness. When a person fails to confront their own darkness, they unconsciously assign it to others, turning their inner chaos into external accusations. What makes it even more disturbing is that this isn't an act of conscious deceit. Their brain literally rewires itself to support the illusion. According to Stanford research, During intense projection, the brain enters a delusion-like state, activating what scientists call reality distortion fields, where facts no longer matter and personal narratives take over. This is not just about misunderstanding or confusion. It is neurological possession. The person becomes convinced that their distorted view is not only accurate, but morally justified. And from that moment on, they are no longer seeking truth. They are defending a false reality with religious intensity. And it doesn't stop with them. These individuals subconsciously begin recruiting others into their delusion. They spin their version of events so compellingly, so emotionally, that others, especially those who lack emotional grounding or spiritual discernment, start to believe them. The lie spreads like wildfire, turning personal illusion into collective confusion. Carl Jung called this collective possession, a phenomenon where groups of people become emotionally hijacked by a single person's unprocessed shadow. This is why entire social circles, workplaces, or spiritual communities can turn against someone overnight without real cause. The group isn't thinking, they're reacting, echoing the projections of a person who hasn't taken responsibility for their inner wounds. And suddenly, what was once a single shadow becomes a storm cloud covering the judgment of many. In spiritual development, this is the exact moment where discernment becomes a shield. Without a solid spiritual foundation, without the daily practice of self-examination, mindfulness, and emotional clarity, you can easily get swept into someone else's drama and become a pawn in their subconscious war. These people will appear as victims. They will cry louder than anyone. They will present themselves as protectors of justice, but they are often just protecting the parts of themselves they refuse to see. They will blame, divide, and pressure you to take sides, not out of malicious intent, but because their distorted mind cannot handle neutrality, it threatens their illusion. This is why spiritual clarity is not a luxury, it's a necessity. You must be able to feel when something doesn't sit right, even if it's said with tears. You must trust your body when it reacts with unease, even if everyone else is nodding in agreement. Spirituality is not about blind compassion. It's about wise compassion, the ability to love without losing yourself, to help without being manipulated, to stay grounded in truth, even when others try to redefine it. Because once someone fully believes their projection, they're not trying to deceive you. They've already deceived themselves. And from that place, they can destroy reputations, fracture relationships, and rewrite reality while feeling completely righteous. In a world where shadow projection is rampant, your power lies in your ability to pause, observe, reflect, and refuse to join the performance. Spiritual development is your armor. It protects your peace, sharpens your intuition, and gives you the courage to walk away from those who mistake illusion for truth. 3. 5 warning signs of shadow projection. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And this single insight unravels the invisible danger behind one of the most destructive psychological mechanisms, shadow projection. When a person begins projecting their own disowned flaws, guilt, fears, or insecurities onto others with unwavering certainty, it marks a psychological red flag that Jung believed must never be ignored. The first sign of this projection is a dangerous level of certainty about their own motives. They are completely convinced that their intentions are pure, their actions are justified, and their emotions are righteous, leaving no room for open dialogue or self-reflection. Any attempt to question them is perceived as a threat, not because they are confident, but because they are subconsciously defending a fragile and fragmented sense of self. True spiritual wisdom and intelligence involve the humility to question one's own inner motives. But the shadow cannot bear that level of honesty. The second sign is their resistance to contrary evidence. When someone lives in the grip of the shadow, they interpret your defense as guilt and your honesty as manipulation. No matter how calmly you explain yourself, their mind twists everything to reinforce their narrative. They don't want truth. They want control over their version of it. In this way, shadow projection becomes a subtle form of psychological warfare, where you are accused of crimes you didn't commit, blamed for emotions you didn't provoke, and misunderstood in ways that feel eerily calculated. The emotional charge behind these accusations is the third sign. Their reactions are explosive and entirely out of proportion to the situation. A minor disagreement becomes a full-blown betrayal. A simple boundary feels like an attack to them. This intensity is not strength. It is unhealed trauma lashing out, desperate to avoid the mirror of self-accountability. The fourth sign is the always the victim mindset. No matter how events unfold, they are perpetually wronged, misunderstood, and targeted. The cast of enemies is constantly rotating. One week, it's their friend, the next their colleague, and eventually, it becomes you. This shifting blame reveals the core of the shadow, an unwillingness to sit with personal pain and a compulsive need to assign that pain to others. As long as they're the victim, they never have to change. And what makes this cycle even more toxic is the fifth and final sign, subtle recruitment. They quietly begin to influence others, spinning a distorted story about you behind your back, laced with emotional manipulation and carefully chosen half-truths. They don't need to outright lie, just shape perception through implication, tone, and selective storytelling. It's psychological triangulation masked as concern, and it's how the shadow spreads its influence like smoke, blinding others before you even realize the fire has started. These signs aren't just patterns of human behavior. They are warnings from the soul that something deeply unconscious is leaking into conscious relationships. When intelligence becomes arrogance, when emotion becomes a weapon, and when victimhood becomes a performance, the danger is no longer psychological, it's spiritual. Recognizing shadow projection is not about blaming others. It's about protecting your energy, your truth, and your peace. Carl Jung didn't just give us theories. He gave us a spiritual compass. And if you listen closely, it always points back to the same place. Know yourself, own your shadow, or risk becoming it. 4. 6 stages of escalation. Carl Jung's deep understanding of human nature revealed a pattern so subtle, yet so dangerous, that it often goes unnoticed until it causes irreparable damage. He called it a psychological escalation, a slow, almost invisible descent that begins with a small, seemingly harmless misjudgment. At first, someone misunderstands you, perhaps unintentionally, perhaps due to their own unresolved pain. But instead of seeking clarity, they start to reshape their perception of you, not based on who you truly are, but based on the projection of their inner wounds. This is where the first crack in the mirror of truth forms. and if not addressed, it grows. That misjudgment evolves into a personal narrative. They begin to see you not through a lens of objectivity, but through a distorted image colored by their own insecurities, past traumas, or envy. Jung warned us that this isn't just psychological noise. It's a dangerous pattern, because once their inner story becomes their truth, it spreads. It's spoken to others. It's shared in whispers, in subtle shifts of tone, in quiet doubts planted like seeds. And these seeds grow in the minds of those around you, altering your reputation without you even knowing. People begin to look at you differently, respond to you with hidden suspicion, withdraw their warmth. Suddenly, you're no longer seen for your integrity or your heart. You're seen through the warped lens someone else crafted from fear. By the time this dynamic reaches its final stage, you find yourself isolated, misunderstood, or even excluded from the very spaces where you once belonged. And the most painful part is that none of it was based on your truth. It was built on another's projection of their shadow. In the language of spirituality, this is not just about social exclusion. It is spiritual warfare, carried out through unconscious minds. It's what happens when emotional immaturity meets unhealed pain, and the person weaponizes perception without even realizing it. This is why spiritual awakening isn't just about expanding love and light. It is about learning to recognize when the darkness isn't loud, it's silent, creeping, and cloaked in the illusion of rational concern. It starts as empathy, becomes suspicion, and ends as exile. Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And so instead, they project it. In modern life, you see this pattern in families where one person becomes the scapegoat, in workplaces where truth tellers are isolated, in friendships where envy disguises itself as concern. Even in spiritual circles, those who carry light are often the ones most subtly targeted, because their presence activates what others haven't faced within. And so, if you are walking a spiritual path, understand this. Your awareness is your armor. Your discernment is your protection. Don't wait for dramatic betrayal to recognize danger. Watch for the shift in tone, the silence after your name is mentioned, the change in eyes that once admired you. Not all battles are fought with swords. Some are fought with stories. Some are fought in silence. And in this world, where reality can be rewritten with perception alone, the most spiritual thing you can do is see clearly, protect your energy, and step away when the mirror no longer reflects your soul, but someone else's shadow. 5. Additional dangerous states. Jung identified. Carl Jung identified some of the most dangerous psychological patterns not in the obviously aggressive or openly toxic people, but in those who appear spiritual, composed, and even wise. One of the most alarming states he uncovered is ego inflation, a condition where a person is completely convinced of their moral or spiritual superiority. These individuals don't necessarily come across as arrogant. In fact, they often speak with calm authority, using language that sounds enlightened. But their unwavering certainty is what makes them dangerous. When someone believes they are the embodiment of a divine or heroic archetype, they stop listening, stop questioning, and ultimately stop evolving. True spirituality is rooted in humility, not perfection. Jung warned that when a person identifies too deeply with a spiritual or righteous role, they become spiritually inflated, disconnected from reality, and unable to relate with the complexity of others' experiences. Another sign of hidden psychological danger is persona identification. This occurs when a person becomes so consumed by their carefully constructed public image that they repress all flaws, pain, and negative emotions. They wear the mask of perfection so tightly that they forget it's a mask at all. They may appear kind, composed, and generous, but beneath that surface lies a shadow self that has been buried for too long. Jung believed that when we become our persona, we're not growing, we're performing. Eventually, the suppressed parts of the psyche will demand release, and when they do, they often explode in destructive and shocking ways. This is why spiritual development is not about maintaining appearances, but about facing what we hide from ourselves. Archetypal possession is another dangerous state Jung warned about. This happens when a person becomes overtaken by a symbolic role like the savior, the victim, the martyr, or the righteous warrior. They don't speak as themselves anymore. They speak from the voice of a myth. They may say things like, "I've been chosen," or "I must suffer for the truth," not from self-awareness, but from a trance-like identification with a story that strips them of personal responsibility. This kind of possession feels powerful to the person experiencing it. It gives meaning and structure to their life, but it replaces genuine human connection with performance. Spirituality demands that we remain grounded, aware, and connected to our inner truth, not lost in archetypal theater. Finally, Jung described the trap of repetition compulsion, where someone unconsciously recreates the same toxic dynamics from their past again and again. These individuals often cast others into familiar roles from old trauma: the betrayer, the abandoner, the oppressor. They don't do this to manipulate. They do it because their wounds are driving their reality. If you're not aware, you can easily get pulled into their unresolved script. They repeat the same emotional cycles, not because they want pain, but because their inner child is trying to rewrite the ending. And if you let them, they'll turn your life into a stage for their trauma. This is why spiritual development is vital. It teaches us to see patterns, to step out of unconscious loops, and to choose healing over repetition. Jung's insights remind us that danger doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through charm, wisdom, or spiritual language. The people most consumed by shadow often look like they have it all together. So we must learn to read the energy behind the words, to ask whether someone is evolving or hiding, growing or controlling. Spirituality is not about how others perceive you. It's about how courageously you face your own shadow. And true spiritual development begins the moment you stop performing and start transforming. 6. How to protect yourself. When Carl Jung warned us about the dangers of psychological projection, he wasn't speaking from theory. He was speaking from spiritual wisdom, born out of deep observation. There is a silent violence that occurs when someone begins to see you not as you are, but as a reflection of the parts of themselves they cannot accept. They do not yell. They do not attack. Instead, they project. And in that subtle distortion, your identity becomes a canvas for their unconscious pain. This is why intelligence isn't just measured by knowledge, but by your ability to recognize what doesn't belong to you. The smartest form of protection begins with intuition. If something feels off, trust that. Your nervous system is often more honest than your reasoning mind. When the energy changes, believe the shift. When the tone becomes colder, or the praise suddenly feels transactional, you are no longer being seen. You are being used as a mirror for someone else's inner chaos. The most dangerous thing you can do at that moment is explain yourself. Do not debate. Do not argue. Because to someone deep in projection, your words don't land. They ricochet off their internal world and return to you twisted. Carl Jung knew that fighting illusions only entangles you in them. Spiritual awakening demands that you choose consciousness over conflict. Some people don't want clarity. They want control. And when they feel they're losing that control, they may wrap their shadow in charm or concern, all to keep you unsure of yourself. That's why setting boundaries isn't just emotional hygiene, it's spiritual survival. Keep your private life private. Your dreams, your fears, your past, these are sacred spaces that not everyone has earned the right to enter. The more you reveal to the wrong person, the more material they have to weaponize later. Protect your story by telling it only to those who can hold it with clean hands. Documentation becomes your anchor in moments when reality is being bent by someone else's narrative. Writing things down isn't petty, it's clarity. When someone tells you that something didn't happen, or that you're overreacting, or that you're too sensitive, your written truth will remind you that your perception is valid. Intelligence isn't just knowing what happened, it's knowing what to do with what happened. When repeated interactions leave you drained, anxious, or doubting yourself, pay attention. That's not just a bad day. That's a spiritual red flag. And if none of this works, withdraw. Not with vengeance, but with awareness. You don't owe anyone your continued presence if they only love you when you're easy to control. Jung taught that the most powerful act is not to fight someone's shadow, but to refuse to carry it. Distance is not always a punishment. It is sometimes the highest form of respect you can give yourself. Your energy is a temple. Your peace is a spiritual altar. And your boundaries are the walls that protect it. Let them be strong. Let them be clear. And let them remind you that spiritual intelligence isn't loud. It's knowing when silence, space, and self-trust are the only answers you need. 7. Jung's final warning. The most dangerous individuals are not those who scream or lash out, but those who project their inner darkness onto others while remaining completely unaware of their own shadow and utterly convinced of their righteousness. Carl Jung warned that this combination of total unconsciousness of one's shadow, coupled with complete certainty in perception, is not only psychologically dangerous, but spiritually corrosive. In spirituality and spiritual awakening, this is a crucial insight because it reveals how someone can carry hidden emotional poison while appearing externally calm, polite, or even virtuous. They wear a mask of normalcy, but behind it lies unprocessed guilt, suppressed rage, unresolved trauma. And when they see these rejected parts of themselves mirrored in you, they attack, reject, or criticize you without ever realizing they're reacting to their own inner wound. Jung called this projection, and it's one of the most destructive forces in human relationships, precisely because it hides behind false clarity. A person who refuses to confront their own inner darkness will subconsciously assign that darkness to you, making you responsible for the emotional burden they themselves are unwilling to carry. And the tragedy is, the more unaware they are of their shadow, the more convinced they become that their perception is truth. This phenomenon can be seen in families where one member becomes the black sheep, not because they are inherently flawed, but because they refuse to conform to the collective denial of truth. It appears in romantic relationships where one partner demonizes the other, not due to real harm, but because the other's strength, freedom, or sensitivity reflects back the aspects they've buried. It happens in the workplace, where someone becomes the scapegoat for team dysfunction, simply because they represent the truth no one wants to admit. Jung observed that people who cannot integrate their own shadow become blind to their own projections. They do not simply accuse, they believe, with unshakable confidence, that you are the villain, the liar, the manipulator, when in reality, they are disowning their own inner villainy, deceit, or control. This is not just psychological, it is deeply spiritual. Because true spiritual wisdom requires responsibility. It demands that you look inward before pointing outward, that you ask yourself whether what you see in others is actually a disowned part of yourself seeking recognition. But most people are terrified of this depth of self-honesty. They hide behind moral superiority or victimhood, and in doing so, they become dangerous without even realizing it. That's why Jung insisted that when you see this pattern, when someone begins projecting with total conviction and zero self-awareness, your safest response is withdrawal, not confrontation, not debate, not explanation. Because you are no longer interacting with the person, you are interacting with their unintegrated shadow, wearing the mask of certainty. And no amount of logic or love will awaken someone who is deeply committed to unconsciousness. Instead, your spiritual responsibility is to protect your peace, preserve your clarity, and refuse to carry what was never yours. This is the silent wisdom of awakening, to recognize when someone is not actually seeing you, but simply using you as a screen for their unresolved pain. The moment you stop playing the role they've unconsciously assigned to you, you interrupt the cycle and free yourself from the trap of projection. In this light, spiritual awakening is not just about love and light. It's about boundaries, discernment, and the courageous refusal to become someone else's emotional landfill. True inner peace comes when you no longer internalize the projections of the unaware and instead stand firm in the sacred knowing of who you are. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the warning signs Carl Jung believed could protect us from hidden psychological danger. If today's message resonated with you or opened your eyes to something you hadn't noticed before, let us know in the comments below. Your voice matters in this growing spiritual community. And if you found value in this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another insight that could shift your perception, protect your energy, and elevate your path. We're just getting started, and the next revelation might be the one that changes everything.